stand it.
No, no.
Hey, everybody, it's Juli Pitra with the Thursday Talks about Pitranomics, my 10-part strategy to grow, protect, and transfer wealth. And we actually started last week, had a little bit of a technology issue, and don't think we streamed live on Facebook nor YouTube. But if somebody can check and make sure we are on today on both platforms, I am, thank you, ready to get started again for the year. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I am going to get my presentation ready. Again, shout out to my wonderful people for helping me develop this great presentation. Hold on, let's start it here. I'm so glad I have a great circle of people that help me do what it is I'm trying to accomplish. And that's part of what Pitranomics is all about. So now let's do this. Can everybody see that? Is the screen up? Okay, wonderful. Last week, we did a quick recap of all of the Pitranomic strategies. And today we're going to dig deep into the first one, or part one of the first one, which is where am I? And before you begin any long journey, you really need to understand where you're starting. And then you got to figure out where you're going. So part one is, okay, what is my direction? What is going to drive me in life? So we're going to talk about what are our goals? What are our end of life goals? So again, by the way, I hope you guys like the new colors. Let me know what you think. But the first part of the Pitranomic strategy is an assessment. And it's really, really deep. You have to do major work to figure out what's important to you, what's going to drive you, and what do you have available to get that done. So now, first part, what are your end of life goals? And then what are your resources necessary to accomplish those goals? And what we focus on, what I talk about all the time, is money, energy, and time. Those are three resources that no matter how much of them you have, they are finite. And because they are finite, you have to prioritize how they're used. And that's where the fun begins. So now, end of life goals. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit for anyone who hasn't heard this. An end of life goal is something that if you don't accomplish in your life, and if you were to imagine, hey, I die tomorrow, would this be a major regret not accomplishing? And the reason why I use that as the descriptive feature is because when you are facing that end of life, and this is what I experienced with my mother years ago, she died in 1996. And I was so glad to have these life-altering conversations with her. And one of the things she said to me, I am not ready to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to die. That was very clear. She didn't want to, but she accepted that she was going to. And at that point realized, I don't regret anything. I've been loved. She said I was a major joy in her life. And that's not me going, hey, I'm awesome. It is a beautiful thing to have had joy in your life from another human being. And this is also important to me. And so I felt from that point forward, how I wanted to live my life was such that based on wherever I was in it, if it were to come to an end abruptly, I wouldn't have any regrets on how I lived it. And we're going to get into that because 2023 for me was a year that kicked my butt. And I don't intend to spend too many more months, days, hours like that. I want to enjoy my life. I want to enjoy the people. So your EOLs drive your life purpose. Some of you have heard of that book called A Purpose-Driven Life. What is your purpose? What are you willing to dedicate your life to dedicate all available resources toward, to have drive all of the decisions that you make? That's what we're talking about here. So when you're determining an EOL, the first pass, and this is an iterative process, the first pass is often something that doesn't answer all of these questions. It doesn't answer, why is this important to you? Doesn't cause you to deep down until you go through the iterations. What values do you truly embrace that support this goal? What are viable alternatives? This is a very real thing to consider, because you might come up with a goal, and then through your analysis and your digging, you realize that based on what you value and based on what you really want, this alternative might be a better choice. Who knows? Got to do the work. What resources, your money, energy, and time, are needed to accomplish this goal? Because almost any goal is going to require resources to accomplish. And everybody has limited resources. So that's why you learn to prioritize once your EOL is strong enough and a strong enough driver. And whatever this goal is that you choose, how do you know you've done it? What are the indicators of success? What are the boxes you can check to say, I have accomplished this goal? These are the things that we need to dig down into with each goal. So I have something, I call it a typical EOL. It's an example. It's not necessarily something that everybody has. By the way, I've been messing around with this, so if there are mistakes, it's not the fault of my assistants, they're all mine. So anyway, that's okay. But let's say your goal is to provide a private school education for grandchildren. Well, one of the first things that come to my mind are, okay, private school education. Is that college? Is that college and high school? Is that college, high school, and elementary and middle? Is there a particular type of private education? Is it secular or religious? All of these questions have to be answered so you know, I keep hitting the table, so you know if you've accomplished it. Too much ambiguity and you never know if you do. And that would be devastating if you left so much ambiguity in this purposeful goal, and then you realize you don't even know if you've accomplished it. So why is this important? Let's talk about private school. Most of the people I've ever spoken to about private school say the number one reason they've sent their kids to school is low teacher-student ratio. Okay, sounds great, low teacher-student ratio. Now, why is that important? When I was going to school, I don't recall there being much talk, elementary school in particular, about teacher-student ratio. Teachers had between, I would say 20 and 30 kids. It just depended, you made do. Why it worked then and why I don't think it works now, and this is just my opinion, is that when I was growing up, there was a certain respect for teachers and for authority bred into most American children, which seems to have sorely diminished now. And so a low teacher to student ratio means that teacher can't control the classroom. And conversely, teachers have a lot less authority and, I guess, freedom to institute control over the classrooms. So they want more teachers for each student because the classrooms have become more unruly. I remember when my son was in, I want to say it was first grade, it wasn't kindergarten, because that lady controlled the class, no problem. But my son's first grade teacher, well, she was a tiny little thing. She wasn't too much taller than the first graders, because some of the first graders were big. And I remember reading for the classroom, and she had a hard time, a very difficult time, keeping the kids seated, keeping them focused. So in my understanding, a low teacher to student ratio is required when your expectation is the classroom will be difficult for the teacher to manage. That's what I think. If anyone has anything else that they think, please put it in the chat or, let me know. Another reason why they might feel private school is important. If you have strong beliefs, let's say, for example, strong religious beliefs aren't supported in public school as much as they were when I was growing up. And when I was growing up, most of the strong religious beliefs were Christian, and in fact, Protestant Christian. So if you are not that and you want your beliefs supported in the educational system, you might choose a private school for that. Another is the type of education that is given. When I realized when I was growing up, my curriculum more closely follows what is now called International Baccalaureate. There was philosophy, there was logic, there were a lot of classes. There was even home ec and budgeting. All of these things were part of my public school curriculum, which I didn't see my kids get. They didn't even have driver's ed. They certainly didn't have home ec. They didn't teach you how to cook a basic meal. They didn't teach you how to balance your checkbook. They didn't teach you how to properly address an envelope. And what is laughable to me is there are high school students that need help properly addressing an envelope because the art of sending mail is disappearing. So is that important to you? Then you want to pursue an environment where it is. Another reason for private school education is, and this is not to sound elitist, but some people want to control the types of kids that their children are interacting with. Maybe they want children that can afford that education from a certain type of home with parents from a certain type of background. If that is what you want to do and you have the means and you have the desire, I'm for it. We actually moved from Plano, which has a very good reputation, to Frisco to try to get some of the things we wanted for our children. Now, here's the thing that I think it's important, really important to realize. If you make one choice, it's not all perfect. There are advantages and disadvantages to doing that. But maybe the overarching goal for this, I want my children to go to private school education. Maybe it's not just private school education. Maybe it's, I want them to be able to attend XYZ school district, even though it's a public school. So for example, when we were looking to place our kids in another school, one of the school districts we wanted to consider was the Highland Park School District of Dallas. It's got a very good reputation. It's got a lot of things going for it. The reason why we decided not to, one, because I didn't really want to move to Dallas. Big mistake. I should have moved to Dallas in retrospect. But I didn't want my children to be the poorest of the group. I wanted us to be kind of midstream. I didn't want them to not have any of the advantages that their peers had. I also didn't want them to be more advantageous than the others around them. Mid-road was what I was shooting for. Don't be an object of pity. Don't be an object of envy. I think when I talked to some people that went to Highland Park, you still get the full spectrum. You got those that were very well educated, and you got those who maybe didn't take advantage of the opportunity offered, and we'll put it that way. One of the questions, are there benefits to attending public school rather than private? What held out for us, thank you for the question, was that it was important to us for our kids to be living among the children they went to school with. What we thought we were getting was children they could go outside and play with, children they could build post-curricular activity relationships with. Like I did. I went bike riding with my friends. We went, actually, in elementary school, I spent a lot of time in the woods, in the forests. For those of you that know me now, it's like, ooh, that's hard to believe. But I did. Growing up, we left the house. We maybe packed a lunch, but most of the time we just took off and we drank out of neighbors' hoses if we were thirsty, and we didn't come back until we were starving. And we were gone all day, and we had a great deal of freedom to grow as children. That is not the environment that my children grow up. It was very hard for where I live for me to feel comfortable just to let them free range. And so for someone that has this belief, I want my kids to go to private school, that could be a reason why, because a lot of us my age don't feel that the environment in which we grew up, which felt safe, I'm not saying that it was, but felt safe and felt like it's somewhere kids could grow and learn about life. You know, here's an example that I grew up with. If your mouth got you into trouble with another student, that was something your body had to deal with, one way or the other. That is not what happens right now. The administration and the parents are too much involved. And I believe that when you learn that what you say and what you do to others results in almost immediate feedback as consequences, you learn how to mind your manners and your hands. But now we have a whole generation of people who've not learned how to do that. They say whatever they want, they're inconsiderate, they're vile, and they feel like they shouldn't have to suffer consequences for the venom they spew out into the world, which was not the case. You had a child that said something nasty to another child, and the teacher heard. There was a parent, teacher, parent, child conference. They all got together and they discussed it and they worked it out. And in fact, with my daughter's first year in kindergarten, when we were in Plano, before we moved, there was some skullduggery by my daughter and one of her friends. And, you know, I talked to the teacher and we had a meeting and we had the kids promise how they were going to behave. And if anybody's met my daughter, her strong-willed nature did not miraculously appear as she grew up. It started in the womb. And she basically told us she was not going to, this was her little kindergartner, she was not going to abide by any rules. And well, that was a fun visit when we got home. So for these reasons and more, if you choose as a goal, I want my kids to go to private school, you have to dig down why. And if any of these things that are why it's important can be accomplished with an alternative, then you need to investigate that. If I had to do it all over again, which you never get a chance to do, but if I did, I probably would have chosen a Dallas neighborhood to grow up in. I think the people, the parents that I've met in Dallas are kind of more my speed. They're more, not that there's anything wrong with what's in Frisco, but when you don't fit in your environment, you're not accomplishing what you want. And I would have picked something maybe a little less affluent, more hardworking, more urban, so that downtown was close by, somewhere where they had more freedom to roam, to go to parks, to use public transportation, to go somewhere. I remember in middle school hopping on the bus that all of us would meet at one house or another, and we would go on a bus to the Citadel Mall and watch a movie and eat snacks and then come back. And if someone needed to be picked up, they would be picked up from one of the houses where we met. But for the most part, you had to see your way home, even if it was dark. So you learned how to walk the streets and get home and not be afraid, and just a whole different independent way of growing. So thank you, Shamir. This is working beautifully, being able to type this in as we go. So thank you. So what values support this goal? Well, let's dig into that. If you're saying, I'm hoping if you're saying you want your child to go to a private school, you want the quality of education to be superior. If you're willing to pay property taxes and then pay for public school, I would hope one of the things you're paying for is a superior education. So again, what is a superior education? If I had to go back and redo it, I would want my children to have a slightly different curriculum. I would want mathematics to be more strongly represented. I would want sociology and psychology and philosophy, some of the softer sciences, greater emphasis on social science and history. I would like logic to have been taught. I would like a great emphasis on grammar and vocabulary and penmanship and context and nuance in language. I would have liked a second language started from maybe third grade or a third language, which would have been the case in my children, if I had to do it over again. So maybe your goal is, let me do what I wish I would have done for my grandchildren. And so my value is, I believe in education, but more than education, I believe in being taught how to think critically. And what I mean by that is you are able to take information as it's presented, look at it, sift through it, and make strategic decisions, which I think is missing in a lot of kids. Now, does it require a private education? I don't know. I think it requires looking at the curriculum offered by the schools that are available in your area and looking through the eyes of an experienced parent. I did not have the advantage of having parents who'd grown up in Texas give me advice about where to send my children to school. But having almost completed raising kids, I would have some words of wisdom and advice for my kids when it comes to raise their kids. And I would like to provide some support, some resources, not just money, which would help, but energy in the form of education as to what to look for, and time. And this is really interesting. I would like to see my grandchildren. So one of my commitments now has been, I got to get my health in order. So the chances of that happening are high, so I can improve my time, because I would like to be available to assist, to guide, to be a source of support for my children as they raise my grandchildren, their children. So critical thinking and independence, this should be something that your education teaches you, how to be productive, how to be independent, and how to be sane, how not to be easily influenced by the things that don't matter. So those are my thoughts as to what a superior education is. I actually had a funny conversation with my daughter not too long ago, maybe in the past couple of weeks. And she said she'd never heard, or she didn't know anybody who was as much of a stickler about grammar and vocabulary as I am. But that does not aid me in communication all the time, being a stickler, right? But when you have everybody on the same even ground of understanding the constructs of our language and what words really mean and how powerful they can be and all the different contexts, so that you can now communicate on a level of nuance rather than simplicity. Well, I think that's great in a number of ways, because it helps build relationships in marriage. It helps build relationships in friendship. It helps build relationships in employment when you know how to communicate. So the next value I would like to have in education, if this were my goal, is superior communication skills, both in mass and individual. So a lot of people will join something like Toastmasters, or, learn how to public speak, learn how to debate, learn how to argue. I want them to learn those things in school. I want my grandchildren to get that experience in school. Again, is it private school? Is it public school? Is it private school in a certain area? Is it boarding school? I have no idea. What I'd like to do is provide the availability of the resources. And then this is not in particular my value, but if one is devout in any particular faith and the secular school system disturbs them, then they're going to want a private school that focuses on whatever religious belief they have. That is not necessarily something I want for my children, but I completely understand someone wanting it for theirs. And I think that is a totally valid reason for trying to get your kids into a particular school. Now, by the way, the goal of private school for grandchildren, it's not really one of my EOLs. I'm trying to provide a little bit something else, but it's probably a subset of what I'd like to provide. This is the EOL we will use as an example, as a typical one, as we go through this quarter cycle of all of the strategies. When I revert back to that, that's what I will refer to. I've always been talking about my personal goal. I want to use something that is how shall I say, I think relatively and widely understood and accepted as a possible good goal that we could chew through as a way to get through Pitranomics. So thank you again for getting that all there. Okay. So what are some viable alternatives to private school? Okay. So there's living in a different neighborhood, moving, living in a neighborhood that has a so-called good program. There's living in a district that has a magnet school and hoping that your kids get in. And I believe that Richardson has this set up, if I'm not mistaken. They have magnet schools. Don't quote me, I could be wrong. But I think they have wonderful free schools that you either test to get into or somehow you can get into these schools that provide a non-typical public school education. The other thing that I think is important is living abroad for a certain amount of time, which encourages your children to think outside the typical American box. Some people have chosen, instead of private school, they choose homeschooling. And I remember living in Prague, which was the first time I met homeschool children that I knew of. And I was so impressed. So in my mind, homeschool children had a very positive perception in my mind, because these children that I met who were, let's see, they were the kids of missionaries, and I don't remember what kind of missionaries they were, but the kids were very confident. They spoke to me respectfully as an adult, but with confidence and joy and sweetness, their vocabulary, their manners, their bearing. And I was thinking, I would love to have my kids come out like that. That's before I even had a child. But homeschooling would not work out for me. So you have to understand your limits. I don't think my children would be sane if they had grown up with me. Hey, out. Hey, out. My dog's gonna knock over all my lights. Go. Okay. So those are alternatives. If anyone can come up with other alternatives, great. But these are alternatives to a private school. They don't cost as much, except for maybe living abroad. Okay. But they might accomplish some of the values and the goals that one has when thinking about putting one's children in private school. Okay, so what resources are available? Well, I don't know if someone wants to take a good Google, but I can guess. What's that school? Green Hill Academy? I think for elementary through high school, you average about 35 grand a year. You haven't even gotten your kids to college yet. You haven't done any extracurricular activities like sports or music or anything like that. You've got, and here in North Texas, I'm not talking about school sports. I'm talking about the club sports or the, I don't know, there's so much extra stuff to do with your kids here. So if you want to send your kids to private school, you're going to have a lot of money. And if you want your grandkids to get to private school, you need probably, what, in today's dollars, a good $425 ready for each grandchild that you want to send by the time they are ready to start school, which is say 5 or 6. So my oldest is 23. Let's say if I'm going to take out my crystal ball, you're going to have a child in 5 years and 28. So 5 years after that, they'll be ready to start school. So in 10 years, I need to have money that accounts to basically 12 years worth of $35,000 today's value school payments available for that child to accomplish going to Green Hill, if that's the school that I'd like for them to attend. And I'm not sure I'm right about that, but I don't think I'm that far off. If anyone knows something different, great. That's a lot of money. That might be beyond the reach of quite a few people to be able to put each and every grandchild they think they may have. For some people not, but maybe for quite a few it would be. What are the resources? Not only is there money, but just in case you have the money available, let's say you do, and you want that money to be for your grandchildren, then you have to pretty much trust that your children will handle that money appropriately for your grandchildren. Because there may be a strong likelihood you're not around to make sure that's happening for your grandchildren. So that goes back to, how are you educating and preparing the stewards of this goal, if it becomes the case that you're not the one? So are your children prepared, or do you at least foresee them being prepared at the time that they're able to take the financial resources you provide and spend them appropriately on private school education, and not, say, blow it on, I don't know, really expensive clothes, shoes, bags, cars, or whatever? You want it to use for education. So many of the Pitranomics strategies that talk about your resources also help you talk about how to protect these resources and how to make sure they're used in the right way. That's why you cycle through the strategies. Another resource, not just money, energy, and time, but education. How do you educate your children to be financially savvy, to take care of a financial gift, right? How do you educate them to appreciate the reasons why you want to hand them this financial gift? You also want to encourage them to find appropriate spouses. So your child and their spouse, or their child's parent, whatever the family dynamic is, are of one accord to provide this value for the children. Now, just to take myself in as an example, my mother and I had talks about education. My mother was a fond believer of public school education. And I'm a firm believer of public school education, even though I can say without a doubt, I believe public education has changed quite a bit since when my mother grew up and when I grew up. So if we go back to when my mother grew up, she grew up in a segregated environment. I don't really know what that's like, but she wanted to provide opportunity, because in that segregated environment that was supposed to be separate but equal, it was in fact very unequal. So balancing that inequality of what was available to her versus what was available to other kids was very important to her. Likewise, I wanted to be important to my children. What I grew up with, I don't know if I will say that it was limiting, but it was segregated, but I was a very, very strong minority. My children also didn't get to grow up in what I would call a diverse environment. I don't know if that's the environment that's best for them. I've never been in it long enough to be able to take the advantages, but I'd sure like to be able to look for it. I'd like the opportunity to check it out, to see what the long-term benefits of that education would be, which I haven't been able to do. So the resources I need is time to explore exactly what are the harbingers of the good education are that I'd like for my kids to check out. So that requires me to look into, these are my wishes I would like to have passed on. So it's up to me to make sure I articulate them well for the people that have to actually execute them. All right, the next step, what are indicators of success? Okay. I'm kind of going off the top of my head here. So indicators of success of a good education, maybe a private education, is the ability to think independently and critically. Number one, to be able to take information and come up with one's own conclusion, independent and critically. The ability to get along with a great many different kinds of people. And by get along, I'm not saying that you're one-on-one best buddy friends with, but you can deal with people that are from this country or not from this country, people that are older, that are younger, people that have more money or less money, people that have more education or less education, people that are more driven or less driven, not just the diversity of race or religion or even ethnicity or nationality, but of thought, of perspective. Know that there are good things in everybody and bad things in everybody. I would like for them to be children of the world and not just children of whatever city that that they grew up in. I feel like both of my children have had the opportunity to see up close other parts of the world. And so hopefully the world is their possibility to consider excelling in, not just Dallas, not just Texas, not just the South, not just the US, but the world. Whatever they choose to do is fine. What is possible for them, what is probable for them is the world. So that's an indication. I would like for them to be successful in college. And this was actually a conversation I just had with my daughter because last night or the night before, although I was good in high school, I was not prepared for college. I was not prepared to be on my own. So when I went to college, it took me a long time to get through college. It took 7 years for me to graduate with a 4-year degree. Probably a good thing because I started at 16 and graduated at 23. 23 was a good year for me to graduate. It would not have been good for me to graduate from school and then be thrust into the working world at an earlier age. I could tell stories, but let it suffice that at one point my parents had to just bring me home. They're like, you're not doing well. We're not going to throw money after bad. You're going to come home and we're going to make sure you're ready before you go back out. And I was talking to my children. I said, yeah, that's what I wanted to reinforce in you guys. You get 4 years of support. You don't do it in 4 years, don't know what to tell you. Get it done. And my daughter says to me, well, Mom, it's really most typical that people graduate in 4 years. I mean, why would you take longer? I was like, you take longer when you're not ready. You take longer when you don't have the skills. You take longer when just the mere concept of trying to feed yourself appropriately takes so much more time than you're used to and able to put in your schedule, that things like studying and being on time don't happen. Being prepared means you're not going to go out and party on a Thursday night when you have a final on a Friday. Or, like I did, just not even show up. And I laugh at that now. I mean, I can't really imagine what I was thinking. I remember it, but I can't really imagine. But I was not prepared to be on my own. And even when I left college at 23 and went to work, I went to work somewhere and I lasted about a year. And then I still needed to come back home and season a little bit. I was extremely immature and not prepared to take care of myself alone. Well, my husband and I, Andre, he's in here somewhere. Maybe he'll jump in, maybe he won't. That was not what we wanted for our kids. We didn't want kids that couldn't take it on their own. So they had to be able to take care of themselves. They had to be able to survive and thrive on their own. I think we've done a fairly good job. Not that it's perfect. No child is perfect, but I think we've done a fairly good job. They've done fairly well. I have high hopes for their future. Their father has high hopes for their future, even though they're going to make probably 1 or 2 faux pas between now and then. Hey, trying to make sure, hold on, my dog doesn't mess up my lights and stuff. Okay, so indications of success. I think these are some, there may be others. And then you repeat this process for each EOL that you come up with. And you don't just do it once, you keep fine tuning. So maybe after you go through the first process of, I want private school for my children, maybe that morphs into, I want the ability for my kids to take my grandchildren out of the country and experience the world. I want my kids to have the opportunity to provide additional teaching resources. Maybe if the school's not offering it, they find courses in philosophy, in logic, in debate, in argument, in language. Maybe I help my kids have the resources to homeschool if that's what they decide to do. So that's why you want to keep going through an iterative process on your EOLs until you fine-tuned it and you know exactly what it means to be successful with that EOL, and you know exactly what you need in order to accomplish that EOL, and you know exactly why whatever it is that's accomplishing is important for the goals you have for you and your family decedents. And then you go through the next EOL. And I recommend 3 to 5. I prefer 3 because I think the more you have, the more fragmented your purpose can be. And it doesn't hurt at all that there are synergies between each of these EOLs. So coming soon, not right now, there will be the opportunity to have one-on-one boot camps, because a lot of the work it takes to get through to your EOLs, through to your understanding what resources you have, and to getting the roadmap. Sometimes that requires going deep into feelings and thoughts and information that's not appropriate for a public platform. But coming soon, there will be this boot camp to get you through strategies 1 and 2 for those that are interested. Now, I think all the other strategies can be part of community work. I really believe it's good to have accountability and support, and to know that you're not the only one going through whatever it is you're going through. And I have found it extremely useful to learn from people in my community things that I may not have noticed. But coming soon, there is that ability to have the one-on-one boot camp. And then that is it for the presentation part. I'd love to get your thoughts about what was said and what your thoughts are. And let me see if I'm missing any question. Okay, Shamir, thank you. You graduated in 5 years. You did a little bit better than I did.
Well, my comment on that is because it wasn't that I wasn't focused or partying or any of that. Really, I feel like I did my best. However, I did not come from the best education system. So my struggle was because of that. So not only did I change majors because I was really struggling in the other major, but then, once I did change majors, I did better, but then I kind of fell behind because of, just not really being able to attack it the way I wanted to, because I didn't get that foundation that I needed. So that was kind of
completely understand.
that. So this is a good topic, and I guess I'm kind of I don't know if you would call it a testimony of why doing something like this is important. So try as you might, you have a better experience.
Right.
And not just struggling to get through that next part of the education experience.
Exactly. And I know in the past, I would say 40 or so years, there's been a lot of stress given to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and such, and mathematics, for people to study. Is that is the crucial thing that everybody should study. And I think, yes, people should have a strong background in STEM, but they should also have a strong background in how should we call it, philosophy, sociology. One of the things I don't think we understand and can't recognize just how powerful propaganda and social media are in our lives, and how much it impacts everything that we think. And I saw this video on TikTok. I meant to save it to share it. This guy would have words pop in your minds, because in your mind of the listener, because he would say the words for a song and then he would stop. And of course, the next words would pop into your head. That's programming. There's no other word for it. That's programming. How much are we programmed by music and commercials? Think about it. When you watch television, let's just go through that. Television shows were and are created to generate revenue from advertisers. And even if it's not on a network channel, advertisers pretty much run that, because there's product placement and all that. Advertisers their number one job is to try to influence someone to change their minds from what they were doing to something that the sponsors of the advertisers want them to do, which is consume or purchase or favor this product or vote a certain way. If you don't know how to think critically, if you don't know how to look at information presented and realize I have to look deeper, I have to look wider, I have to keep looking, I can't take anything itself at face value. I have to start considering what else could it be? Does that make sense? What is my foundation to be able to decide what makes sense and doesn't? Maybe you want to supply that. Another video that I saw talked about how realistic AI photos are becoming. And it's crazy. But she said, you know what? You can still tell as of right now whether or not a photo is AI. And she was like, look at this. There are obviously fingers missing. The way this guy's leaning across like he's leaning across a ledge. It wasn't what it would really look like in person because it actually looked like his stomach was cut in half. Now, once she pointed that out, oh yeah, that looks weird. I would notice that if I had the training to notice. And that's what critical thinking and a proper foundation gives you, is the ability to notice things that you need to pay more attention to, that you need to maybe dispute in your mind. Don't accept things on blind faith. Be able to take a hypothesis and test it through a series of logical steps, and come up with a conclusion that you can believe in. And not only that, be able to communicate your hypothesis and your logic and your conclusion. And one of the things that is sorely lacking, at least in the interactions I've had, is that people don't know how to do this. There's no logical argument. There's no logical discourse. People aren't actually having a debate. They're spouting propaganda at each other and they get louder and louder. Like, that really means more. And it's bewildering to me that is what's considered having a position, a strong position, which is how loud you can say your position over and over and over, when there's no way they can sensibly defend that position. And that's scary. So anyway, it took me a long time to graduate because I needed to season. Were my parents happy about? No, by the way, I was still spending lots of money. It wasn't like I was cheaply going through these extra years. By the time I graduated, my parents were like, our daughter and all this money graduated from Georgia Tech. And what's funny is I did go to grad school, did a whole lot better because they weren't paying for my grad school. When I went, and I did get a scholarship, but I still had to pay for everything else. And when you've got skin in the game, and that's another thing, let's teach our children and our grandchildren to have skin in the game, to keep you motivated. It's kind of what an EOL is. You are dedicating your life to something, which means all of your resources that are available are going toward that, which means maybe you don't have time for these other trifling things. You have no skin in that game. You keep your skin in this game and you get it done. So, any questions, any comments about what I've said? Well, if not, because it's still before 7, I appreciate everyone attending. I appreciate your attention. And next week, we're going to continue our talk about the first strategy and talk about how to understand what resources you have available. And that's next Thursday at 6 p.m. And thank you guys so much for being on with me. It's always great to have a chat with you. And I will see you next week. Okay? Mwah. Bye-bye.